I've been seeing a lot of competitive teams putting out posts looking for coaches and having trouble finding them lately. I have some insight into that situation as something of a professional Splatoon coach myself. I also want to address a sentiment I've seen from a number of coaches about what they look for in teams to coach, because there's a perspective shift I'd like to see there. To get into that, though, we'll need some context first. In competitive athletic sports, there's always a coach. On a professional team, there are really multiple coaches. There's the head coach, assistant coaches, coordinators between the various sections of the team, lots of potential mentors for the players. But even on a little recreational team for little kids, every team is universally going to be run by a coach. The coaches are the source of adult supervision for the games, in that case, the equivalent to teachers in the classroom. I think when a lot of competitive players first get into Splatoon, they expect it to be the same way. Once a team starts really getting serious about improving, whatever that means, they just automatically figure that getting a coach is a natural step in the process of climbing the ladder. It doesn't even necessarily require that much thought to come to the vaguely justified conclusion that, you know what, we should get a coach. That's the kind of team we are. That's an actionable idea for how to improve. We should get a coach. Let's get a coach. In esports, though, there are a lot of spaces that are more decentralized than that. While some major esports leagues are modeled after professional sports teams and have a staff of people, not just coaches, but personal trainers, chefs, managers, PR people, there are so many video games trying to be competitively adopted that many of them just don't have that kind of infrastructure built up right now. Until there's pretty serious investment in any particular title, there isn't enough of an incentive for big organizations to form and bring on a professional coach to make that team their full-time job. For the same reason, while there is a whole generation of gamers that are getting old enough to enter the workforce and be teachers and parents, the people who do most of the coaching in scholastic-level athletic sports, because their interests are spread so thin across so many video games, there's no guarantee that the students are interested in playing the games they happen to know well enough to coach. I'd be excellent at helping kids understand Smash or Splatoon, but tell me I need to teach someone to play Valorant, and you might as well just find a YouTube channel and show them that instead, because I've played all of an hour of that game in my life. It's different for athletic sports. A lot of athletes play a lot of different sports, and there are few enough popular sports that chances are actually pretty good that the football coach also knows how to play baseball. There are major athletic traditions that are older than any living person, games that have stayed largely the same for over 100 years. In esports, maintaining an active scene for 10 years is incredibly unusual. By then, the game may be replaced by a sequel or a competitor, or its entire genre may just lose its mainstream appeal and it goes away. Splatoon is already starting from a weak position as an esport because it's a Nintendo game, and so it receives relatively little from its developers in the way of support for the growth of its game competitively. Smash has been somewhat successful, but for one thing, I would argue that it has the potential to be much more successful than it is. I genuinely think that game could have been competitive with the likes of Fortnite and Counter-Strike if Nintendo had bought into the idea. For another, the Smash community developed and grew largely on the efforts of a community that formed around Melee back in the early 2000s. It's had more than 20 years to grow into what it is, while even the very first Splatoon game isn't even 10 years old yet. Given that there's a smaller competitive scene than a comparable community like Smash, and given that there's all but no investment being put into the scene outside of the space Smash tournaments allow us to occupy at majors, ask yourself for a moment, what would incentivize someone to want to become a Splatoon coach? Certainly, professional coaching staffs don't exist. Yes, we do have freelance rates we charge if someone wants to pay us to learn, and systems like Medify to help manage those. But with the number of coaches interested in monetizing their services, and the number of players in a community creating demand for those services, those kinds of systems are only really side money for the vast majority of coaches in any esport, unless they're the very best. I certainly am not making enough money from Medify alone to support myself. I need multiple sources of income to even make do as much as I am making do right now. And Medify is definitely not the biggest of those sources for me. Of course, the majority of coaches in athletic sports, as we've discussed, are going to be for recreational or scholastic leagues, largely parents and teachers. And of course, those folks aren't making it their full-time jobs. But what I think people fail to remember is that those people, parents and teachers, are more personally invested in the kids they're coaching than just about anybody else. Oftentimes, they would have done that job for free to bond with the kids, to pass on skills their teachers and parents and grandparents taught them. They've voluntarily taken on the role of building up the next generation for a more real reason than financial investment, and that is their incentive to do so. Few are the parents who know Splatoon better than their children. Fewer still whose children are old enough to be coached. Few are the teachers who have even heard of Splatoon. We don't have as much of a reason in our community to become specifically a coach. Coaching, teaching other players, has long been a part of our community, but the conventional idea of one team, one coach, of that coach sticking with that team, being there to guide every practice, just isn't practical a lot of the time. More often, a team will bring in a coach to VOD review with them for one session to develop some new training goals, and that'll be it for at least a little while. I'm happy to take an hour or two out of my day to help some friends figure out what's going on with their team. I'm a lot less happy to make a commitment to being there 2 hours a day for 5 days for an indefinite span of time. At least with an athletic sport, the youth recreational leagues usually aren't practicing every day, and the league only lasts for a season. That's just a couple hours 2 days a week for around 3 months, and then it's back to normal. If you find a way to make a workout out of it for yourself, you may even just get to replace time that you would have been spending at a gym anyway. There also isn't as much in our community to tie one coach to one team. When a teacher takes a coaching job, they're getting opportunities to interact with students outside the context of a classroom. It builds a bond with those students that can be immensely helpful in the classroom. To those kids, you're special, and they're much more likely to behave well, listen to you, and take what you say to heart. You learn more about them than you would have known otherwise, and you gain insight to who they are as a person and what motivates them, and how you can inspire them to be the best they can be. As a parent, you want to have more quality time to spend with your kid, and coaching not only helps you do that, but also lets you spend time with their friends and see how they interact with their friends and keep in touch with other parents and become much more connected to the community around your child than you would have been otherwise. In Splatoon, though, it's a lot more likely you get approached by 4 strangers on the internet from different parts of the country, if not the world, and there aren't as many factors driving you to become personally attached to and invested in those people. Coaches in Splatoon are generally a friend of a friend who decides to invest in the team because of their personal relationship to them. Even in cases where coaches are specifically looking for a team of a certain skill level to coach because they're personally interested in developing the skills of becoming a coach or they find it enjoyable, the first teams they're going to latch onto are teams they're already personally close with. That investment in the team isn't springing up from being in close geographic proximity or having an innate interest in their improvement. There are active parents and teachers spread pretty evenly, if maybe in greater or lesser concentrations, in every community. But there are pockets of the Splatoon community where there aren't close personal connections to players that are at a high enough level to effectively coach lower level teams. This brings us to a conversation that happened on Twitter recently. Maybe it had been happening beforehand, but the first point of contact I had with it was through Ren. For those who don't know, Ren is the coach of Jackpot, one of the top teams in North America, which they have been for some time now. Ren says, "This isn't directed to any individual, it's more of a general trend I've noticed. Quick aside, this is the kind of language that you'll hear me use all the time. I'm never going to criticize something that just one person is doing in public. If I ever go public like this, it's something I've seen a lot of people do, and that seems to be exactly the case with Ren here. I'm not going to lie, if someone is going to approach me for coaching, you'll need to give me a reason to. Show me you're actually committed to improving and that you have the humility and drive for it first." They go on to explain that they want players to already have some critical thinking put into their improvement, to have good questions ready to ask, and to be motivated to improve even without coaching, so that they know the time they invest in their coaching will help the players accomplish something. They don't want to end up in situations where they're hauling a team up their plateaus by the ankles, but instead giving the team the boost they need to fly. There's a lot of nuance to communicate about my thoughts about Ren's post. I think that in the position Ren's in, and from their perspective as a coach, everything they're saying makes a ton of sense and there's a lot of wisdom in it. It's totally correct that a team that does a lot of critical thinking outside of their interactions with a coach and studies top-level video will improve much more quickly than a team that asks the coach to do all of that for them. The coach wants to be able to see their team succeed, and given the choice between working with a team that is capable of using their insights more effectively and a team that won't build on what they're taught, the coach gets more personal fulfillment out of working with the more receptive, thoughtful, resourceful team. Think about the kinds of sports teams you would get invested in and root for. If you knew that the team was driven and had a lot of potential and were making a real, sincere effort to get to the top, would that not make you more likely to become a fan of them? Well, in a situation where being from a certain major city or a certain school or a certain friend group isn't going to predispose you to being a fan of that city's, school's, or friend's team, what else is there to make you want to support them? If you want a coach, give them a reason to be a fan of your team. Being driven, positive, friendly, resourceful, thoughtful, these are more than just assets to your team for their own sakes. These make you attractive personally to coaches. This isn't a point that Ren makes explicitly here, but it is also worth noting that as far as coaches go, Ren is going to be in very high demand. Jackpot is about as high level a team as an English-speaking person can possibly coach. And that alone is going to lead people to value what Ren has to say. Ren probably just doesn't have enough time in their day to spend on every single player and team that would like to be coached by them. It's not even that they get to be picky, it's that they have to be picky. From the strictly utilitarian perspective of wanting to do the most good they can in the amount of time they have, working with the people who will listen, who won't waste a coach's time, for whom a lesson doesn't have to be repeated to be internalized because it will be practiced even while the coach isn't there to supervise it, there's an argument to be made that coaches are doing more good for the community and the world in general by only working with the most receptive players and teams, that those players should be the priority. Given that Ren is a top-level coach, someone with a level of expertise that very few people have, I agree that, for them, working with a less receptive team or player might not be a good use of that expertise. There are only so many people who have the skill set to get someone into high or top level. I am certainly not one of them. I'm happy to do a VOD review for a top player, but I often come out of those situations learning more myself than I teach to them. If there are players who desperately want to get into top-level play, who just need to hear something nobody else knew to tell them before, and that would be all they'd need, and they'd power their way up the leaderboards off just that one session's worth of help, Ren might be one of the only people on the planet who can help. If instead, Ren takes on a team that anyone else could look at and see are unmotivated, a team where addressing the lack of motivation is more important than addressing the lack of game knowledge, that's like making a sledgehammer out of platinum. That resource is far too rare and has far too many useful properties to be using for an application where many other more common kinds of metal will do. But I also don't think Ren's position as a top-level coach is generalizable to every coach in the community. From my perspective as a coach, I see immense value in working with that unmotivated team and opening their eyes to the state of mind they're in. It would be such a success story for me to help someone realize that they didn't have an intrinsic motivation to improve, that they were only there in the coaching session because they felt like it was what they were supposed to do. If I can reach someone and ask them, who's doing the supposing? Show them that they have no obligation to meet someone's expectations and to instead live according to what they want. That, to me, is powerful, a genuine human good that I've done, even if the end result is a Splatoon player leaving the community to go do something else instead. If a team is just slower to learn than another team, and they really do need reinforcement over a longer period of time to understand something well, they maybe shouldn't be pursuing someone like Ren, but I think they are no less deserving of coaching than anyone else. Something I learned as a teacher is that there are only so many students that are going to be your favorite kind of student. The receptive, resourceful, positive kid that makes you feel like the world may just be on the right track after all. You have to remind yourself that those kids would do well for themselves with or without you. That's what the word resourceful means. If you want to have the greatest impact you can, you also have to be willing to work with the students who won't do as much to improve for themselves until you work with them to get them to develop that self-sufficiency. A professor, a world-leading expert, they aren't best used teaching grade school. Many more people than them with far fewer qualifications can teach grade school. But we need an awful lot more grade school teachers than we need professors on one particular subject. Most of us coaches don't have REN's qualifications, but most of us do know the game at least a bit better than someone else in the community, and anyone can and should be working to develop a positive learning mindset. If those skills put you in a position to be a coach, I would urge you not to undervalue the experience of working with a team that might not be perfect students. They may not be your favorites. They may need you to instill some structure, help build up their discipline, and get them to take more initiative. But that doesn't mean they're not worth coaching. If anything, the experience you get from working with them will improve you more as a coach, if not an expert on competitive Splatoon, than working with a team that does most of the work for you and makes your job easy. To bring this back around and address players seeking coaches, I'll first say that you should take everything Ren says to heart. Be your own coaches. Be as self-sufficient as humanly possible. Watch top-level videos. And instead of just talking about what you should be doing in-game, practice to make sure you're actually doing what you say you should. But also realize that Ren is coming from a place of being one of the best at what they do. Someone who lives in the space of top-level competitive play. If your team is a little less motivated, has trouble maintaining morale, needs more structure or discipline, as long as you're willing to be humble and honest about those problems and you bring those to a good coach, they should still be able to help you with those things. There's nothing wrong with feeling overwhelmed and needing a place to start to anchor you, some individualized feedback to help you understand what you specifically as a team or player need to be working on first and foremost. The only singular characteristic that anyone needs in order to be coachable is to be willing to change what they're doing in response to feedback. As long as you've got the humility and open-mindedness to do that, and mind you, that's not easy to have, and you shouldn't overlook how important it is to have that, but as long as you've got it, you should never feel ashamed of seeking out whatever help you think you need.